The sound of the gold-plated Mont Blanc nib gliding across the paper in the silent conference room was ear-piercing. Scratch, scratch, done. A signature full of artistic flair, flamboyant, and twice as large as necessary. David leaned back in his expensive Aeron leather chair, loosened his tie, and flashed the smile I once loved, but now only found nauseating. The smile of a man who thought he had just swallowed the world whole. "So, that's it," David said, pushing the thick file toward his lawyer, Stan. "Aura is officially yours, 100%. No more disputes, no more barriers." He turned to me, his eyes holding not a shred of the affection from our 12 years of marriage, only a fake pity reserved for the defeated. "Elena, I hope you use this settlement money wisely. Maybe you should open a bakery? You always liked baking, didn't you? The tech business is too harsh for people sensitive like you." Stan, the lawyer in the $3,000 suit with cheap morals, smirked. "A wise decision, Miss Elena. Leaving while the ship is at its peak is the best way to save a little face." I said nothing. I just adjusted my glasses and packed my pen into my handbag. I looked at the clock. 10:14 a.m. Perfectly on time. "What is it?" David asked, his voice teasing. "Are you waiting for a tearful goodbye? Or are you waiting for Chloe to bring in the champagne? She's waiting right outside." I smiled. For the first time in 6 months of hell, I smiled genuinely. "No, David, I'm waiting for them." "Them?" The heavy oak double doors of the conference room suddenly burst open. It wasn't Chloe with a tray of champagne. It was 3 men and a woman in stiffly tailored gray suits, wearing earpieces, and most importantly, wearing badges. The temperature in the room dropped to sub-zero instantly. "David Vance." The woman in the lead spoke up, her voice as cold as a judge's gavel. David shot up, his expression shifting from smugness to anger. "Who are you? How did you get past the reception desk? This is a closed board meeting." The woman held up her badge. The metal glinted under the ceiling lights. 3 letters that make any American businessperson tremble. IRS, Internal Revenue Service. And the man next to her held up another badge. SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. "Special Agent Miller, IRS Criminal Investigation Division," she said. "We have a warrant to search and freeze assets related to allegations of financial fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion at Aura Stream." David's face went pale, but his arrogance remained. He pointed a finger at me. "Oh, I get it. You're looking for the former CFO, right? My wife, I mean, my ex-wife. She was in charge of the books. If there are any errors, it's due to her mismanagement. She just signed her resignation papers this morning." Agent Miller glanced at the paper on the table, where David's signature was still wet. Then she looked at me. I sat there, calm, my hand resting lightly on my old leather briefcase. "Actually," Miller said, a faint smirk playing on her lips, "we aren't interested in former employees. According to the records we received via a direct update from the notary system 2 minutes ago, and based on the document you just signed, you, David Vance, are currently the sole owner, assuming full and personal legal liability for all operations of AuraStream, including all past debts and misconduct. Is that your signature?" David stared at the paper. His hand started to shake. He looked at me, his eyes wide with horror. "And me?" I just gave a slight shrug. "You said you wanted everything, David. I just gave you exactly what you wanted." But I'm getting ahead of myself. For you to understand how a woman known as the brain of the company let her husband rob her of 12 years of youth and career, I need to go back to the beginning. My name is Elena Vance. I am 36 years old. And I just executed a legal con worth $5 million on my own husband. The story begins 12 years ago, not in this luxurious conference room, but in a dilapidated, moldy garage in Seattle. I met David when we had both just graduated. He had charisma, vision, and the ability to sell a bottle of water to a drowning man. He talked about changing the world with cloud technology. I was more practical. I knew how to write code. I knew how to balance cash flow, and I knew that vision couldn't pay the rent. We founded AuraStream 3 months after we got married. The division of labor was clear. David was the face. I was the brain. David went to seminars, drank coffee with angel investors, and practiced TED Talks in front of the mirror. And me? I sat in the corner, wearing a baggy hoodie, typing for 18 hours a day to build the back-end architecture for the product. For the first 5 years, I was the only one who knew the bank account password. I was the one who secretly sold my Honda Civic to pay the salaries of our first 3 employees when David overspent on gold-plated business cards. I was the one who stayed up all night fixing the logic errors in his presentation slides before meetings with venture capitalists. "You are my rock, Elena," he told me the night we received our first Series A investment of $2 million. He hugged me, the smell of champagne and expensive cologne lingering on his shirt. "We are going to rule this world together." I believed him. I believed that we meant equals. But as AuraStream grew, as we moved from the garage to a Class A office building downtown, everything began to change. David started believing his own PR lies. Forbes magazine called him the new tech prodigy. Articles praised his singular vision. My name gradually disappeared from the interviews. At first, it was just small things. "My wife helps out a little with the books," he would tell partners. Helps out a little? I wrote 80% of the original source code. Then he hired a new CTO, a guy from Silicon Valley, and pushed me down to CFO. "You're good with numbers," David persuaded. "Leave the tech to the young guys. I need you to keep the money. You're the only one I trust." I accepted stepping back. Because I loved him. Because I wanted him to shine. And because I thought that, whatever the title, we were still a team. Fatal mistake. 2 years ago, Chloe appeared. 24 years old, a marketing graduate, yet recruited straight by David into the position of VP of Brand. She was young, vibrant, and looked at David as if he were the reincarnation of Steve Jobs. She brought a toxic new wind to the office, lavish parties, workations at 5-star resorts that yielded no results. David started changing how he dressed, how he spoke, and even how he looked at me. In his and Chloe's eyes, I became the old, boring lady, the stingy penny pincher who always said no to their money-burning ideas. "Elena, you're too safe," David grumbled in a strategy meeting, right in front of Chloe and junior staff. "You think like a mediocre accountant, not a market leader. You're holding this ship back." I looked at him, stunned. Me, the person who mortgaged my parents' house to save this ship when it was sinking, was now being called a hindrance. Chloe giggled, covering her mouth gracefully. "David just wants what's best for the company, Elena. We need sexiness in the financial statements." Sexiness in the financial statements? That was the stupidest thing I had ever heard. But David nodded in approval, as if it were gospel truth. I started noticing I was being left out of important email chains. Meetings were rescheduled without notifying me, and most concerning of all, I started seeing irregular expenditures. Large sums of money transferred under market research or partner development to shell companies overseas that I had never heard of. As a CFO, my professional instincts kicked in. I didn't confront him immediately. I quietly investigated. And what I found in the hidden data files wasn't just adultery or wastefulness. It was a crime. A time bomb worth $5 million that David, in his stupid arrogance, had triggered without even knowing. Before I tell you about that horrifying secret, if you like stories about smart women getting justice, hit that subscribe button right below. I promise, the best part is still ahead. You won't want to miss the moment David realizes the sexiness of federal prison. Thank you. Now, back to the numbers that lie. The coldness turned into action on a rainy Friday evening, coincidentally our 12th wedding anniversary. I had come home early and cooked beef Wellington, a dish David used to love. I even opened a bottle of 2008 red wine, the year we got married. But 8 p.m. passed, then 9 p.m., and David still hadn't come home. His phone was off. At 11 p.m., the front door burst open. David walked in, but he didn't bring flowers or gifts. He brought Stan, his personal lawyer, and a pale blue file folder. The smell of women's perfume was heavy on David's coat, the scent of Chanel No. 5 that Chloe always wore. It was strong enough to overpower the smell of the rain. "We need to talk, Elena," David said, his voice cold, devoid of emotion. He didn't even look at the cold dinner table. I sat down on the sofa, clutching the glass of untouched wine. "Happy anniversary, David." "Don't make this difficult." He waved his hand, grimacing as if I had said something rude. "You know this has been over for a long time. We aren't on the same level anymore. I'm leading Aurastream out to the open ocean, and you just want to anchor in a safe harbor." Stan placed the file on the coffee table. "This is the Divorce and Asset Division Agreement, Ms. Vance. David is being very generous." I opened the file. The numbers danced before my eyes. David wanted to keep 100% of the company's shares. He wanted the house. He wanted the cars. In exchange, I would receive a lump sum cash payment of $200,000. $200,000? I laughed, a bitter sound. "David, this company was valued at $80 million in the last round. I own 40%. My share is worth $32 million. Are you kidding me?" David sighed, sitting down opposite me, steepling his fingers in that superior manner he learned from CEO coaching courses. "That's paper valuation, Elena. The reality is the company is struggling. Cash flow is tight. Besides, what have you contributed in the last 3 years? I'm the one bringing in contracts. I'm the one building the brand. You are just an obstacle." And then he threw the knockout punch. "Yet if you don't sign, Stan will release files regarding your lack of management competence that caused the company losses. I will sue you for breach of fiduciary duty. I will ensure you never find a job in this industry again. You will leave with empty hands and a shredded reputation." I looked at the man I once loved, the man I ate instant noodles with in a garage. Now he was ready to destroy me just to clear the path for his young mistress and his colossal ego. "Give me time to think," I whispered. "You have 1 week." David stood up. "And Elena, I'll be staying at a hotel. Chloe, she needs more comfortable space." They left, leaving me alone in the large, cold house. I didn't cry. Tears are a luxury for those who still have hope. I no longer had hope for this marriage, but I still had hope for my freedom. That very night, I started digging deep into Aurastream's financial system. David said the company is struggling? That was a lie. Revenue last quarter was up 20%. So where did the money go? I logged into the system using an old admin account that David had forgotten I still had access to. Never underestimate the person who wrote the source code for your system. I skipped the superficial reports David liked to show off. I went straight to the raw transactions. And I found it, Project Falcon. It wasn't an R&D project, it was a black hole. Over the last 18 months, David had siphoned a total of $5.2 million from the company's reserve fund. He transferred the money to an account in the Cayman Islands under the guise of special hardware procurement. But when I looked up the identification codes for those transactions, they didn't lead to any hardware vendor. They led to an unlicensed crypto exchange. David, the tech prodigy, had used company money to gamble on some garbage meme coin, hoping to double his personal wealth. And the result? He lost it all. $5.2 million evaporated. But what was scarier was how he hid it. To cover up this loss from investors and tax authorities, David had directed the new chief accountant, an obedient young guy, to book this amount under research and development costs, which are tax deductible. My heart pounded. This wasn't just embezzlement. This was federal tax fraud and securities fraud. Under the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, the CEO and CFO face criminal liability if they knowingly sign off on false financial reports. David had signed my name on the previous quarterly reports using an electronic signature without asking me. He was turning me into a scapegoat. If this blew up, I, the CFO on paper, would be the first one in handcuffs for mismanagement and cooking the books, just as he threatened. He would play the victim deceived by his wife. A chill ran down my spine. David didn't just want a divorce. He wanted me to go to prison in his place. I sat in the dark, staring at the glowing green computer screen. The initial anger shifted into a terrifying calm. I had spent my life fixing David's mistakes, but this time I wouldn't fix it. I would let him own it. All of it. I started gathering evidence. I downloaded every email directive from David regarding Project Falcon. I took screenshots of login logs showing he was the only one accessing the Cayman account. I backed up recordings from the office security cameras, which David installed to monitor employees but forgot to turn off when discussing plans with Stan. And most importantly, I drafted a counterplan. The next day, I called David. I agree to the divorce, I said, trying to make my voice sound as shaky and desperate as possible. I don't want to fight anymore. I'm tired. I'll sign everything as long as you leave me alone. David laughed over the phone. I knew you'd come around, Elena. You've always been a good girl. But I have one condition, I added. I want assurance. I'm afraid investors will sue me for the losses you mentioned. I want you to sign an indemnity agreement. I want you to confirm that as the sole owner, you assume full legal liability for every financial decision of the company to date. I want a clean break. Is that all? David asked, his tone disdainful. He thought I was running away in fear of responsibility for business losses. He didn't know I was running away from a sinking ship that he himself had drilled a hole in. Yes, that's all. I want to walk away clean. Fine, David replied curtly. Stan will draft it immediately. Just make sure you disappear from mine and Chloe's sight before the new product launch press conference next week. I hung up. David thought he had just won a chess match. He didn't know he had just voluntarily put a noose around his own neck. The only problem now was how to pull that noose tight right when the IRS knocked on the door. And I knew exactly how. I had an old friend at the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, who hated scammer CEOs. It was time for the brain of Aurastream to perform the final calculation. A calculation where the result for David Vance would be a perfect 0. The signing took place on Tuesday morning. David chose the largest conference room at the company headquarters, which had a panoramic view of Seattle. He wanted to turn this divorce into a coronation. I arrived 15 minutes early. I wore an old gray sweater, hair tied loosely, no makeup. I looked pale and exhausted, exactly the image of an abandoned wife they expected. Chloe was already there, sitting on the edge of the table, swinging her long legs in a designer miniskirt. She was choosing new curtain colors for the office. "Oh, Elena," Chloe said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You look haggard." "Don't worry, I hear sea air is very good for old people. With $200,000, you can rent a cute little cabin somewhere." David walked in, laughing loudly, holding an espresso cup. "Come on, Chloe, be nice to Elena. She's going through a tough time." He turned to me. "Did you review the papers? Stan said you requested an addendum?" Stan, the lawyer, pushed the file toward me. "Personal liability indemnity agreement. Basically, it states that Ms. Elena Vance is no longer involved with Aurastream, and David Vance, as sole owner, assumes full rights and legal obligations, including potential debts. It's quite standard, Mr. David. She just wants to make sure you don't call her back to pay the electricity or water bill." Stan smirked. He thought this was just the overcautiousness of a weak woman. He didn't check the itemized legal liabilities I had listed in detail in the hidden annex. David didn't even bother reading. He only cared about the first page, transfer of 100% shares. His eyes lit up. "All right," David said, pulling out his Mont Blanc pen. "Let's sign. I have a lunch appointment with TechCrunch." My heart pounded, but I kept my hand steady. I signed my name first. Small, humble handwriting. Then I pushed the paper over to David. The moment David's nib touched the paper, time seemed to stop. Scratch. Scratch. His signature appeared, large and arrogant. He stamped his personal seal on it. The notary stamped the confirmation. Thud. The sound of the seal echoed like a judge's gavel. Done. It was legally binding. David Vance officially owned everything. The assets, the brand, and the $5.2 million fraud. "Congratulations, David," I whispered, tucking my copy into my bag. "You have it all." "Thanks for cooperating." David laughed, standing up and stretching. "Now, security will escort you to the do." He couldn't finish his sentence before the scene from part 1 unfolded. The doors burst open. Agent Miller from the IRS and the investigation team walked in. The triumphant atmosphere in the room vanished, replaced by sheer panic. "David Vance?" Miller repeated, her voice steely. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, federal tax evasion, and falsifying corporate financial records?" David turned pale, stammering, "What?" "No, you're mistaken. I'm the CEO, but I don't manage the books. My wife, my ex-wife, Elena, she's the CFO. She did everything." He pointed at me, his face twisted with fear and rage. Agent Miller stepped to the conference table, picking up the file he had just signed. She flipped to the indemnity addendum page. "Mr. Vance," Miller said, her voice terrifyingly calm. "According to this document notarized 3 minutes ago, you confirmed that you are the sole decision-maker in all company investment activities, including Project Falcon. You also confirmed that Ms. Elena Vance repeatedly warned of risks, but was overruled by you, and you agreed to assume full legal liability for these losses in exchange for 100% of the shares." David's eyes bulged. He snatched the paper, devouring the fine print he had ignored 5 minutes ago. Clause 4.2. Party B, David Vance, acknowledges that transfers to the Cayman account were under the personal direction of Party B, bypassing the CFO's approval process. Party B assumes responsibility for repayment and explanation before the law. You set me up!" David screamed, lunging at me. 2 male agents immediately blocked him, pinning him to the table. The cold click of handcuffs rang out. Click. Chloe screamed, backing away behind the curtains. "I'm not involved. I'm just a marketing employee. I don't know anything." I stood up, adjusting my sweater. I no longer had the submissive look from a few minutes ago. I looked straight into David's eyes, his face now pressed against the polished wooden table he was so proud of. "I didn't set you up, David," I said, my voice clear and articulate. "I just let you take what you did. You used company money to play crypto. You forged my signature on last quarter's reports. I knew it all, and I sent all the evidence, login logs, emails, meeting recordings, to Agent Miller 2 weeks ago." "Why?" David groaned, tears starting to flow from pain and despair. "Why didn't you tell me? We're husband and wife." I laughed, a laugh that released 12 years of frustration. "Husband and wife? You just forced me to divorce you on our anniversary to bring your mistress home and leave me with $200,000 for 12 years of dedication. You didn't treat me as a wife. You treated me as a scapegoat to go to prison for you." Unfortunately, the pawn crossed the river and was promoted to queen. Stan, the arrogant lawyer, now looked drained of all blood. He was trying to sneak his file into his briefcase. "Don't leave in such a hurry, counselor," Agent Miller said. We also have a few questions for you regarding drafting fraudulent contracts to conceal cash flow. Please come with us. David was dragged away, screaming my name, cursing, then begging. Chloe cried and ran after them, trying to explain to anyone who would listen that she was just a victim. The conference room fell silent. Just me and Agent Miller. You did well, Ms. Vance, Miller said, collecting the file. Thanks to your cooperation, we stopped a major fraud before he could IPO and scam thousands of other investors. Thank you, I said. Can I go now? Of course. You are a protected witness. And under the SEC whistleblower program, because you provided evidence helping to recover tax money and fraud penalties. Miller paused, smiling, a genuine smile. You will receive a reward, approximately 10% to 30% of the total penalties collected. I did a quick calculation in my head. The penalty for this case would be at least $20 million. I think that amount will be more than the $200,000 divorce settlement. I smiled back. I walked out of the Aura Stream building. The Seattle sky was still rainy, but I felt strangely warm. I took a deep breath. The air of freedom tasted sweeter than any champagne. 6 months after that fateful morning, the trial of David Vance became the center of Seattle's press attention. I didn't attend the trial. I didn't need to see him in an orange jumpsuit to know he had failed. I watched the news on my iPad in my new office, a space flooded with sunlight and greenery, completely different from the cold glass walls of Aura Stream. The sentence was handed down quickly and brutally. 8 years in federal prison for securities fraud and tax evasion, plus a $12 million fine. Because David had signed the document accepting full legal liability and assets, including debts, he was forced to liquidate all personal assets to pay the fine. The lakeside house he loved, foreclosed by the bank, his collection of supercars, auctioned off. Even his custom-tailored suits were sold for cheap. And the irony? It was Chloe who hammered the final nail into David's coffin. In exchange for immunity, she took the stand as a witness against him. She testified that David had forced her to participate in lavish trips using company money and that she was innocently unaware. Of course, no one believed her innocence, but that testimony was enough to ensure David had no chance of a reduced sentence. Immediately after the trial ended, I heard Chloe had hooked up with a 60-year-old restaurant chain owner. Some people never change, they just change the host they parasitize. And Stan, the arrogant lawyer, he was permanently disbarred for aiding in falsifying records. Now he's managing the night shift at a convenience store. I hope he likes counting pocket change more than billing hourly consulting fees. As for me, life has turned in a direction I never even dared to dream of. 3 weeks after David entered prison, I received a check from the U.S. Department of the Treasury. It was the Whistleblower Award from the SEC. The reward amount was based on a percentage of the penalties the government recovered thanks to my evidence. The number on the check was $3,600,000. Remember, how much did David offer me to leave quietly? $200,000. I rejected that number to receive 18 times that amount, completely legally, cleanly, and with honor. It wasn't just money. It was validation of my competence and integrity. I used that money to found Vance and Partners. I kept the name Vance, not out of nostalgia for David, but because it was the name on my original patents. My firm specializes in financial consulting and restructuring for tech startups. But I have one rule: I only work with honest founders. I help them build sustainable businesses where profit comes from real products, not from lies or crypto schemes. My office doesn't have lavish parties or meaningless yacht trips, but we have genuine smiles. My employees are paid fairly, respected, and most importantly, they know their director will never make them take the fall for a superior's mistakes. A few days ago, I received a letter from federal prison. The envelope was crumpled, the handwriting shaky but familiar. It was from David. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. In the letter, he no longer had his superior tone. He wrote about regret. He wrote that in prison, he had a lot of time to think. He realized that for the past 12 years, the only person who truly stood by him, the only person who actually protected him from his own stupidity, was me. I traded a diamond for a shiny pebble, Elena, he wrote, and the price I have to pay is my entire life. If I had read that paper carefully, if I hadn't been so arrogant. I folded the letter and put it in the drawer. I didn't reply, not because I was still angry, but because I had nothing left to say. Silence is the most powerful answer. David is exactly where he belongs. And so am I. I looked out the window, watching the city of Seattle lighting up. Before, I always stood in the shadow so David could shine. But now, I realized I didn't need to be anyone's shadow. I am my own light. Dear friends, the lesson here is very simple. Never underestimate the quiet person in the room. Never think that patience is weakness. And most importantly, if you plan to deceive the woman who holds your financial books, make sure you read everything carefully before putting pen to paper. Because sometimes, a signature can be worth a fortune or an entire life. Thank you for following my story. If you feel satisfied seeing a greedy man get his karma, hit that like button on this video. It lets me know that justice is still something everyone craves. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I have many more stories from the underworld of the tech elite, secrets they don't want you to know. See you in the next video. Goodbye.